I'm going to show you 5 principles of the 1 to 10 formula that most businesses end up getting wrong, and that's the reason that most of them end up going out of business within 5 years. I installed these principles in a business and I went from $153,000 a month in revenue in the previous 6 months with 0 profitability to a record of $400,000 a month in just 90 days, with $300,000 of that being in profits. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Ocean Gross, and last year I generated about $30 million for the companies that I worked with, and I help companies like yours scale. And so here are the things that I want you to learn for your company as well. So number one, out of the 5 different principles that we had was accountability specifically. And there was no org chart in place. And so what I mean there was no org chart is it was one person, hub and spoke model, a bunch of people around essentially a bunch of VAs. And so when you don't have an org chart, there's a lot of different things that go wrong. But number one is since there's no accountability, people don't know what they're supposed to do. And so when you say, who is responsible for this thing? Who can help me out with this thing? Instead of it saying, go talk to this department in this area and that department will be able to help you out with it, it was this person could help you out. And really what you want to do when you're making a company is you make an org chart, and then you make an organization, and then you put people into that organization. You don't just put people together and then hope for the best. So there was no roles and responsibilities, and that's part of an org chart. So in an org chart, and there's ways that you can design your org chart. If you're curious, like go look up on AI, just say, my company is this is the revenue, and here's how to build, here's what what should my org chart look like? And it'll tell you roughly what it looks like. When it comes to roles and responsibilities, think about it like this. You're not just gonna show up to an airport and like hope that you're gonna go somewhere. You're gonna actually know where you're going, what time it takes off, what time you're gonna land so you can make accommodations, and then also where your seat is. That's an example of roles is like, where is your seat? Your responsibilities are like, what time are you supposed to be there? What are you supposed to bring? What are you not supposed to bring? Those are examples of roles and responsibilities and why they're important in an actual business. So let's go over to the next part, 4x productivity. There's a lot of things that go into that. One of them was there was 0 SOPs built out. There was no SOPs. So by the end of the 90 days, we had like about 100 SOPs. And the way that you do those SOPs is you make sure that one person, ideally the person at the top, CEO, founder, etc., are looking through all SOPs, making sure they meet a specific standard. But you also need to build the machine that builds the machine. So, and one of the things I'll get into later is team building. And you can actually teach them to make SOPs and then send them to you for approval. Because at the end of the day, we're not the ones doing all the work, because it's just physically impossible to be in 2 places at once. And there's more, Jeff Bezos isn't like shipping packages, right? Like he's actually managing the company, doing planning, not anymore, but he used to when he first started Amazon. So there's 0 SOPs. And so after we built that out, no one knew how to do anything. So even though there were SOPs being built out, people still need to be trained on them. So when you have no responsibilities or no expectations, and you're not really sure how to tell someone how to do their job or where their role is, you can't expect them to just learn it on their own. You have to build an SOP so that you can explain it, and then you have to train on those. And if they do it wrong, then you have to either retrain the first time, or if they do it wrong, they get it wrong again, they may not be the right fit for the role. So that's how we set up all the SOPs, and then everyone came together, made a bunch of SOPs, and then of course I looked through them and made sure they all were approved properly. And think about this, like when you first start driving, you weren't just thrown into a vehicle and said, hey, figure out the gas, the clutch, well, not anymore, but the gas, the clutch, steering wheel, what are the rules of the road? You had some sort of formal education so that you could understand what your responsibilities are when you're driving, ideally if you're a responsible driver. And so all this ended up in a 4x improvement. And so the reason it was 4x is we ended up cutting the total team headcount in half. And so there was half the number of people there. And then we doubled the next month. So the next month ended up being twice as high as the previous month, because we focused on outputs, not inputs. And so the difference between focusing on outputs on inputs is effort is just putting in time, which is what happened. There was tons of people that were working there. No one knew what to do. And so everyone was just putting in time on the clock, but they weren't focused on the output and results. And so that's what happens when you're just focused, you're scattered, you're like running around all the time, you're putting in effort, you're working hard, but you're not necessarily getting the outputs, which is what the reason people pay you for. You are paid no matter if you're an employee, if you're a business owner, or a business to yourself. You are paid ideally for your outputs, not necessarily just your inputs. Because if it was, hey, I'm working really hard, well, working really hard doesn't keep you a job. If you ever lost a job, you may have had that experience. I worked so hard. How could this have happened? That's why. All right, so number 2, which leads us to our next point, measuring Productivity, measuring outputs, not inputs. Leadership team. And this is one of the things that's really underrated and undervalued. Every single business needs a leadership team. And there's a couple different ways to this. There are like, 30-ish people who worked at the company, roughly. And so you have one person managing 30 people. Not possible. Law of management says that you can manage roughly 3 to 8 people. And then if you're on the higher end in an org chart, you should be managing 3. If you're like CEO, you should only be managing 3 people. If you're like a frontline member, you should be managing, maybe up to 8 max. And so that's really part of it. Part of it is because management actually takes time. Management is a skill that you have to build up. And think about it for yourself, and to go back to the Jeff Bezos example, he's not delivering everything by himself. He's not making all of the decisions in the company. That's why he needs to hire experts, build out an effective leadership team, and enable them to make decisions on his behalf. And so part of actually building a leadership team is teaching them how to make better decisions, which will lead us to our next point. Build the team that builds the team. And this was one of the things that did not exist at all, which was extremely important to build, which we'll get into later. Core values and creating culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that was a wonderful quote that I heard from one of my mentors. And it was that if you have a good culture, people will want to work very hard to have a good culture, because oftentimes they don't really have an enjoyable experience outside of it. The world is not exactly a super welcoming place all the time. And so if you have a job that has a very strong culture, people are going to want to stay around there more often. And so we built the leadership team with culture in mind first. And we built the leadership team so that they could enable those under them who were working. So that goes to building the team that builds the team. And the way that you build the team is through core values and building culture, which we'll get into culture a little bit later. All right, number 3 is communication. And so there was a couple different parts: mission, vision, and values. Values being core values being one of them. There was no mission established. They're no one knew why they were there. And so every single business should have some sort of mission and vision and values, so that once again, go back to the focus. You're not just putting in effort. You guys aren't just showing up to work and clocking in. You're focused and you know where you're going and what you're doing. And so we had to communicate that to people. And because they were never communicated what exactly the mission, vision, and values were before. There were none before. And so what is your North Star? What is your reason for existing? So I said, hey, if we can 3x the company within a certain number of time, I'll give everyone a very, very large bonus distributed equally upon everyone. And think about this like chess. If you're playing a game of chess with no rules and no objective of the game, that just wouldn't make any sense, right? Like you can play with kids, it's for fun, right? But when you actually grow up and you want to play like an actual game of chess, you need things like rules and an objective. Objective is to win, is to get the king into checkmate. That is the goal of chess. And the way that you get there is the rules of the game. Pawns only can move a certain way, rooks and knights can only move a certain way. And so that's why it's important to have an objective, like a mission. And then values are like how exactly you're going to, what are the rules of the game that you have to have. So that is why you should have a mission, vision, and values. All right, so money, love, speed, that was the next thing we're getting into. So after we established core values, the mission, vision, and values, so vision was like how we're gonna do this thing, like what are the product lines that we're gonna sell, why are we gonna sell them, why is it important? And at the end of the day, this company specifically sold money. Let me explain. They sold a better alternative to anything that was out there in the market, which was it was truly a revolutionary product. The product saved companies about 5% of their revenue annually, the companies that they worked with, which was a really good offer. Say, hey, you're currently spending 10% on this thing, you could spend 5% with us and get even more output. And so that was a big deal, and it was huge. It still is a big deal. And so the actual product itself was so good, and so we were like, let's sell that, let's sell more of that. But one of the things that was an issue was the setup time, and so like there was no part of the setup time was it took months, and also no one responded. I mean that was another difficulty of going back to communicating, making sure there's an org chart. Things were burning down all the time because there was no communication, and so we spent all this time putting out fires instead of preventing fires. And so what I did was I said, hey, all right, we're going to move over to Slack, and then we're going to have a 5-minute response time within Slack. And so let's just say the average project takes about 30 back and forth messages, and it takes an hour for someone to respond. That means it would take 60 hours in total for back and forth communication between two people to get a project done. That's like almost 2 weeks worth of work time. Now, the reason we said 5-minute response time, because that same 30 back and forth messages went from 60 hours down to 1 hour, 5 hours actually. If you have a 5-minute response time and you have 30 back and forth messages that needs to have. So anyways, that's the reason why I had a 5-minute response time, because then it accelerated the ability to make changes in the business, to hold people accountable, to communicate things, to over communicate things. Because oftentimes people need to be reminded, and that's totally cool. I think as business owners, we forget that a lot, that we need to actually over communicate. So that's why we had a 5-minute response time. And so money loves speed and wealth loves time, because the faster you are, $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow, and the time is sometimes it just takes time to make more money. Sometimes you're doing the right thing, you just need to do it for a longer period of time to make more money. All right, AI use in the market, people with tools versus AI. That's a great one. So AI was not being used in the company at all. And so, for example, in the tech team, they had over a day to get like any response, and that was just the response. That doesn't even mean the ticket was solved. And so we looked at the entire tech team as a whole and we're like, how can we fix this? Number one, I was like, well, there's no AI being used, and AI is like one of the lowest hanging fruits that we can do right now. So we switched over to a tech platform that allowed us to upload all of the SOPs that we had built previously. And after I uploaded everything onto the AI platform, 63% of all tickets were automatically responded to. So we eliminated 60% of the workload, and AI responded instantly. So instead of having a day to just get a response, you went down to instantly. And because we built out things, we built a machine that built a machine, and AI responded, solved a lot of those tickets. And for the tickets that were left over, they went from a 1-day response time to a 2-minute response time. So they massively compressed the time that it took to solve the actual issues in the business, which meant that customer satisfaction went up, which meant retention goes up, people are willing to pay you more, which we'll get into a little bit later. So that's a little bit about the tech side, bringing AI into it. And these little changes make a huge impact on how much money you can have. So as an example, we ended up like cutting the tech budget in half, as in like the amount of money that they had to spend on team and tools and everything like that. And then after we moved over to AI, the very next month, same thing in there. We were able to service twice as many people with half the amount of needed, because we just used AI for this whole thing. And the next part is data. So there was no visibility on really any metrics. They were doing an email thread to measure results of like what it was this day versus the next day, and like what the results were. So there was no data being measured. And this is something that you can use like Microsoft Power BI, or you can use Google Looker Studio. Both of those are great platforms as an example. But you should measure a lot of everything as much as possible in your business, because data is the one thing that will give you visibility on how the health of your business is doing and where you should focus on in your business to be able to grow and scale it. As an example, there's all these ratios in business, which is a whole nother video in itself, which I will make and link below. That data, what's the ratio of lifetime value to customer acquisition costs? What's the ratio of how much revenue you're generating versus how much you're spending on marketing? And you should compare that against your industry. As an example, in e-commerce, it's something like 1 to 4 is like the industry average. So meaning one out of every $4 that's generated in your business goes to marketing. For services, it's more like 1 to 10. And so I have people who come to me who have like a 16x ROAS. So that means they spend $1, they get 16 back on Facebook ads, and they're like, how can I improve this? I'm like, you could improve it, but at the same time, you're also beating everyone else by like 50%. So you're like, of all the problems that you could solve, trying to figure out how to spend less on marketing is not your biggest problem, because it's about the most important problem. And data allows you to prioritize problems. So instead of just solving, all the hundreds of problems that exist in your business, you're like, what is the one problem that if I fix this right now in my business will allow me to scale massively in the future? And you can only do that if you have accurate data to be able to see where you should put your efforts into. All right, so 3 is communication. Let's go over to 4. Product value. And value is a fun word. What even is value? So the issue with value is price is what you pay, value is what you get. And there was no understanding or emphasis of why this product was valuable to people. And it's called the price to value discrepancy, price value ratio. Once again, go back to ratios, right? The average length of time that a customer stayed, and this is another, goes back to ratios again, in this industry, customers should have stayed around for 3 years on average. So there's more, there's less, but 3 years. They were staying in this business for 3 months. Very much different than what the industry average is. Now, am I saying that every business should compare yourself to industry average? Not necessarily. But in this case, it was a red flag to see 3 years is the average length of time that people buy this product for, and it was 3 months for this product. So how do we fix this? So this green line right here represents how much value someone is getting out of it, and the red line is how much they pay for it. So price is what you pay, value is what you get. And people will cancel at this point right here. When the value of the product is less, the value that they receive is less than what they're paying. And so that was the issue, is how do you fix that? And there's a bunch of different ways that you can fix that. However, I focused on specifically what are the outputs, and we'll get into outputs later because that was a really cool thing. Results were actually starting to be measured with data. It goes back to data. Once we actually put a data infrastructure in place, we started measuring results, the time to value that we got, all these beautiful metrics in a business that you could. We started seeing what are most successful clients versus least successful clients, and how do we find what the most successful clients have in common and then repeat them for the rest of the customer. And we could have only did that because we started measuring the data and results that we got from people. So it sounds counterintuitive, but all of this and the more that a customer can pay you means the more that you can spend on marketing. And it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but you should find ways to spend as much as possible to get a new customer, because the person who can spend the most to acquire a customer wins. And think about this: if you put your name out there more, will you have more or less opportunities for people to buy from you? You'll probably have more. Ideally, if you have a good reputation and a good name and a good business. So, and a good offer, and most importantly, a good offer. So that's how we started measuring the results. And if you get people to pay you more, that means you can spend more on marketing. Once again, more people hear about your name. Ideally, if you have a good offer, more people are going to buy. So after that, after we started tracking all the results accurately, instead of just on an email thread that was essentially just hopes and dreams, there were like different product lines that this business had in the total value of a customer. And we found there's a lot of different ways that we could have improved it, but one of them was we found a way to bring one of our profit margins from 20% all the way up to 90% with one product line. And so the same thing, we changed nothing about what was being offered except for how the output was delivered. And it went, that difference went straight to our profit margins because we were providing the same output, but the inputs required from us were less. So that's an example of increasing the value that you get without increasing the cost of what it costs us to deliver the product. All right, so part 2 of number 4, which is product value. Part 4 continued is speed, and specifically time to value. That was activation. How fast can we get the value that someone wants out of this? And so as an example of this, after we started measuring things, we found a way for someone to go from a 2-month setup time. It took 2 months to set up and get started with the product, to get activated and to get their first results, to down to 3 days. And it was like this 100-step process to try to get someone set up. And by the end of it, it was like only 4 steps to get someone set up. And so by reducing the amount of inputs required to get the output, people got results faster. They were happier with the product. They enjoyed it more. And so think about this, if every single time that you had to send a message, you had to write a letter, put it in the mail yourself, put a stamp on it and all that stuff, and then wait for a reply, that would probably make your communication way worse. And so anything that you can do to get a quicker value out of anything that you do in business, the more money that you're probably going to make. So after we actually delivered the value of getting people activated, the time to value was reduced from 2 months to 3 days. Another thing we started doing after we made everything more efficient was the team got dialed in, and so we got 1 month of results. So when someone would get 1 month's worth of results was what they got out of it, they would start getting that in a week. So instead of taking a month to get first results, they're now down to a week, or they would get a week's worth of results, a month's worth of results in 1 week. And so they got more value out of this thing, and it didn't cost any extra money. They just got more value out of the product. And so that was the next thing that we did. All right, Number 5 now, customer acquisition cost. Niched, number 1 is a lot of people are scared of this. They're really scared to niche down. And to our point, it was a $10,000 customer acquisition cost before. That was not sustainable at all. And by the time we ended, it was much lower than that. I'll get to what it was later. But I saw that there was no real clear defined audience. So step 1. So last year I made about 5,000 ads in total. And so I know a little bit about advertising and I made quite a few number of ads. First off, I niche down. People are so scared to niche down because they're like, this product could do a lot. For a lot of people, it's like, yeah, absolutely, sure, it could. But you want to niche down so that you're very specific about who you're talking to and you can address the problems in your marketing. What this does is this makes your ads cheaper. Because if you say, I am talking to specifically this audience, your marketing platform, Facebook, Google, whatever, will know I'm going to show it to that specific audience and will reduce your customer acquisition costs or your cost per lead. And number 2, the next thing that I did after I decided to niche down is actually scripted out ads. The ads before were not the best. They were a hope and a dream. And so we actually sat down and wrote out the ads, who we wanted to talk to, what the outcomes that we were, previous results that were gotten. And so that was step 2 after I decided to niche down. And then we were able to script the ad speaking to our target audience. So instead of having an ad for it's everything for everyone, it's just focused and niche down. So the other improvements that were made after that was the sales team. So we went from marketing, so we fixed the marketing, cost per lead went way down, and the quality went way up because we were actually talking to our target audience. Shocker. When I say sales was a big mess, the sales team couldn't close the door. I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. And so not only that, it was a 4-step, it was 4 calls, and so it was planned a 4-call process, which oftentimes meant that it was actually longer than that. There was no real sales script. It was not very good. And so the close process went from 4 calls down to 2 calls, and those 2 calls could be expanded if they wanted to. So like we had an actual script built out now, we had a process that people could follow through. And these are 4 opportunities for people to no-show. Like already for any meeting, you're gonna get roughly you should be getting around a 65% show rate for sales calls, depending on a lot of factors, but specifically for this offer. And so that's 65% of the time, every single time for all 4 of these calls that someone's gonna show up. Whereas if you only have 2 of them, people are almost twice as more likely to show up just because you have a less total number of calls, less things that can go wrong. All right, cool. And also, let's talk about those 4 calls. You go from 4 calls, which is roughly 4 hours. It's not that, but 4 hours to 2 hours worth of the process. So you're having the same sales rep that is has twice as much opportunity to close as the previous rep because this person has more free time. Well, more time to be able to dedicate to other actual potential clients or leads, other sales calls. So that's what I did to work on the sales process. And the next thing is they were not properly in line. Charlie Munger has this quote that I absolutely love that it says, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcomes. And so as it stood, the sales team was not incentivized at all. They were on base pay with essentially no real, hey, if you close something, great. If you don't, whatever is what it is. And so they were spending about 10% of total revenue on just sales alone, just sales, not marketing, sales. And so by the end of the 90 days, they were spending about 5% on the actual sales because of the processes that we built in place. So that's an advantage of leverage. And all of these little efficiencies in your business add up. So it's not just one thing that was added in like, oh my goodness, it changed the business, which would be awesome in business. But it's all the summation of these things in business, the 1,000 little things that go wrong or 1,000 little problems in business that you have to go back and fix. Just to recap, to go over the 5 different things. Number 1, 4x the productivity of the team by making sure that everything was communicated. Number 2 is I got ahead of all of the problems by installing a trusted leadership team to be able to make good decisions and build them up on how to make good decisions. Number 3 was communicated why, what, how, and who. And then number 4, fix the productivity, price to value ratio, time to value, and lifetime value in total. And then number 5 is customer acquisition costs. So that goes into sales, that goes into marketing, and made that much more efficient. And if you're interested also in seeing how I scaled another business, then click the button below using the exact same 10-to-1 formula. Click the button below, and I'll see you on the other side.